It's 10 p.m. here in Paris. Welcome to our special edition on World Roundup. Hezbollah's longtime leader Hassan Nasrallah is killed by Israeli airstrikes, the most powerful target eliminated by Israel in weeks of intensified fighting. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says his assassination was essential for Israel to achieve its goals. Iran declares 5 days of mourning, with its supreme leader Ayatollah Khamenei saying the blood of Nasrallah will not go unavenged. US President Joe Biden, meanwhile, calls the Israeli strike on Nasrallah a measure of justice. Israeli strikes continue this Saturday in southern Beirut. Thousands continue to flee their homes, with hundreds of families sleeping in public squares and beaches around the city as of Saturday morning. Well, it's been several hours since the confirmation of the news that Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah has been killed in an Israeli airstrike in Beirut. The strike hit what the IDF says was the group's central command headquarters in Dahiyeh, south of the Lebanese capital. Nasrallah led Hezbollah for more than 3 decades and was by far the most powerful target to be killed by Israel in the weeks of intensified fighting. Meanwhile, Israeli strikes continued in Beirut this Saturday as thousands of residents evacuate the city. Well, air raid sirens have also been sounding across central Israel, including at the Tel Aviv airport. The IDF said a missile launched from Yemen was intercepted shortly after the sirens were heard. There have been no reported injuries so far. Meanwhile, Benjamin Netanyahu has given his first public remarks since the killing, saying that the assassination of Nasrallah was a, quote, essential condition for Israel to achieve its war goals.
Nasrallah's elimination is an essential condition to achieve the goals we were setting, returning northern residents safely back to their homes and changing the regional balance of power for years. Anyone who hit us, we will hit them. There is no place in Iran or in the Middle East that Israel's long arm cannot reach, and today you know how much that is true.
Our reporter Claire Paquelin has more details on that address from Jerusalem.
The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been speaking, saying that the elimination of Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of the Hezbollah group, was a necessary step to change the balance of power in the Middle East. He also said that our work is not done and that challenging days lie ahead. Now, what could be in those challenging days? We understand that Israel is working hard. The IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, are working hard to try to make sure Hezbollah does not rearm itself and replenish weapons stock, because Israel has been targeting weapons stocks around Lebanon and trying to eliminate those stocks of munitions and weapons. But if Hezbollah is able to rearm itself quickly, well, that's going to be a problem for Israel. So Israel is at one point targeting areas and has been targeting areas this week on the Lebanese-Syrian border. And we also know that Israel has been very clear. We heard that from the IDF spokesman last night, saying that Beirut airport is a civilian airport and it needs to stay that way. Of course, the big question is, could Israel launch a ground offensive into Lebanon? We've heard from Yoav Gallant, the Israeli defense minister. He's been making an assessment this evening as to how ready the IDF is to expand offensive activity on the northern front. We know Israel has moved combat troops into position on the northern border with Lebanon, but does that mean a ground operation is on the cards? Well, it looks like it's still on the table, but there's a question mark as to whether it will be given the green light or not.
And now help us get an idea of how the news of the killing of Nasrallah is being perceived by the people in Israel. I mean, do they see this as a victory, or is it more the fear that this may spiral even further?
It's a mix, certainly politically, and among people I've been speaking to on the ground when I was in Haifa, a coastal city in the north of Israel, people telling me that they feel this is good news for Israel. The killing of Hassan Nasrallah is a good news for Israel. It will help secure Israel's northern border with Lebanon, hopefully allow Israelis who've been evacuated for nearly a year now to return to their homes, for those who are still living there to live without the threat of rocket fire. That's the hope. But of course, people are also concerned about the reaction that could come from Hezbollah, from the Houthis in Yemen, from Iran as well. Of course, we know Hezbollah is significantly degraded, but that doesn't mean that in some cells in the south of Lebanon, there aren't people there aren't Hezbollah fighters who can't launch rockets into Israel. They can, and they have been doing that today. We've had air raid sirens going off across northern Israel as well as parts of central Israel as well again today. So Hezbollah is not out of the game yet. The future, who could replace Hassan Nasrallah? Could a new head grow, is the expression people are using here? Could two heads grow, is the expression people are using here, to replace Hassan Nasrallah? That is the question. Where do we go from here? But in the words of the Israeli Prime Minister, challenging days lie ahead. But what are those challenging days going to look like? That's the question here.
Now, the assassination has sparked grief and anger across the Middle East. In Iran, protesters say they want revenge against Israel, with others saying they were prepared to take up arms. Siobhan Silk has more.
Iran's supreme leader has promised vengeance for Hassan Nasrallah's killing. For these protesters in Tehran, it's the only way to respond.
We only want retaliation. Compromise will not work anymore. Just retaliation. We can't escape the trap of escalation. We must go forward. We are all ready.
We must support each other. We should be united and we should retaliate. We want a quick retaliation. We will definitely take revenge.
Iran, Hezbollah's closest state ally, is now in 5 days of official mourning. While in Iraq, MPs openly wept in parliament as they read tributes to Nasrallah and calls for revenge.
We say to you, O leader of the resistance, we will continue on your path, seeking revenge for you and all the martyrs. Saeed Hassan Nasrallah is all of us, every Iraqi is Hassan Nasrallah, and every member of our parliament is Nasrallah.
In Gaza, there's grief among some displaced Palestinians, the people Hassan Nasrallah said he was supporting with Hezbollah's intensifying strikes on Israel.
The news is like a thunderbolt. We're losing a great leader in the resistance, whom we were proud of, who defended the Palestinian people.
We're very sad, of course, because he supported the Palestinian people a lot, especially in this time of war that we're going through right now.
For many Gazans, Hassan Nasrallah was a staunch ally at a time they feel abandoned by much of the Arab world.
Now, Hezbollah has given no indication of who might be in line to succeed Nasrallah, but a name that's been floated is senior commander of the group, Hashem Safi-Eddin. Nicholas Rushworth tells us more now on the man who could possibly be next in charge.
He is widely regarded as number 2 in the Hezbollah hierarchy. Hashem Safi-Eddin, according to a source in the Iran-backed group, survived the Israeli attack that killed Hassan Nasrallah. If so, he is heir apparent. Speaking on the 18th of September, he vowed revenge for those killed in pager explosions.
This aggression inevitably has its own punishment. It has its own retribution. This punishment will come, God willing.
Safi-Eddin heads the group's executive council and oversees its political affairs. He's also a member of the Jihad Council, which directs its military operations, and is a cousin of Hassan Nasrallah. He wears a black turban that indicates he is a descendant of the Prophet Muhammad. Born in southern Lebanon in 1964, he completed his religious studies in Iran. He and members of his family have close ties with Tehran. The US State Department designated him a terrorist in 2017. Those familiar with Hezbollah say it's never been without a backup leadership, and that Hashem Safieddine was prepared from 1994 to be Nasrallah's successor.
Well, for some news now on what's going on the ground in Beirut, let's bring in Stephanie Khoury. She's a journalist at L'Orient Le Jour. Thank you so much for joining us, Stephanie. There have been more strikes today in Beirut. Tell us what's been happening there and give us a sense of some of the stories you've been hearing.
So they're really continuing. It hasn't stopped. We slept yesterday during the night with the sound of bombing and woke up the sound of the southern part of the city and other parts of the country. There are now a million citizens that have sought shelter, that had to flee their house. So you have the war, the ongoing war without any break, and you have the displaced period in this. So really, we are in a state of near chaos. There is a sense of shock, consideration after what's happening, and it's being into the unknown. No one has any idea of what might happen.
And tell us about the reaction from Hezbollah today and how residents in Beirut have been reacting to the news as well.
Reaction has been different according to who you course. It's in the state of real shock. It's not completely able to believe the news. It seems out of this reality. It seems unbelievable that Hassan Nasrallah is dead. So there's a shock, there's situation, there is sadness, and another part of the country also is very much scared of what may happen in the future. Whether we're talking about who's gonna replace Hassan Nasrallah and what to become of the party, or the response that might come from Iran or Hezbollah leadership. So there's a mixture of feelings, sadness, shock, and fear. Those are very strong feelings tonight in Beirut.
All right, thank you so much, Stephanie, for painting a picture of what's going on there on the ground in Beirut. Thank you very much. Well, the death of Nasrallah deals a major blow to Hezbollah, which has been hit multiple times since Israel's attack on its pages last week. France 24's Camille Knight takes us through the last 10 days.
The coordinated explosion of pages on the 17th of September sent shockwaves through Lebanon and marked the start of a downward spiral for the Hezbollah militant group. At least a dozen people were killed that day, with thousands more injured. Hezbollah calling it the biggest security breach in nearly a year of cross-border fire with Israel. The following day, it was their walkie-talkies that exploded, killing over 20 people and deepening unease among the militant group. Just 2 days after that, senior commander Ibrahim Akil was killed in a strike on Beirut's southern suburbs. A dozen other commanders were killed in the attack, as well as a number of civilians.
We have entered a new phase that we could call an open reckoning. From now on, we will kill and fight Israelis wherever they are and beyond.
On Monday, the 23rd of September, Israel began launching strikes across Lebanon, taking aim at 1,600 different locations that the military claimed were Hezbollah strongholds. With over 500 people killed in 24 hours, many were civilians.
I have a message for the people of Lebanon. Israel's war is not with you, it's with Hezbollah. For too long, Hezbollah has been using you as human shields. It placed rockets in your living rooms and missiles in your garage.
At this stage, Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant said the Red One forces had been decimated and whole Hezbollah units neutralized, leaving their leader, Hassan Nasrallah, isolated. The strikes continued throughout the week, culminating in the killing of Nasrallah on Saturday.
He was an immediate threat to the life of thousands of Israelis and other citizens.
After confirming his death, the IDF boasted that it had killed all but one from Hezbollah's military chain of command. For more than 30 years, Nasrallah had been the beating heart of Hezbollah. His death, a significant blow to the group that its fighters and allies will be seeking to avenge.
Well, the US President Joe Biden has reacted to today's events, calling the Israeli strike that killed Nasrallah a measure of justice for his many victims. Well, for more on Washington's reaction, let's get an update from our correspondent Fraser Jackson, who is standing by. Fraser, tell us more about the US's reaction to today's events.
Well, Joe Biden has convened a call with Vice President Harris and his national security team. They are being kept abreast of the situation. This as Kamala Harris continues to campaign and fundraise in California this Saturday. But Joe Biden releasing that statement earlier in the day saying Hassan Nasrallah and the terrorist group he led, Hezbollah, were responsible for killing hundreds of Americans over a 4-decade reign of terror. His death from an Israeli airstrike is a measure of justice for his many victims. He then continued, however, ultimately, our aim is to de-escalate the ongoing conflicts in both Gaza and Lebanon through diplomatic means. He then mentioned those ceasefire agreements that the US has been working so hard on over the last couple of months. He said it is time for these deals to close, for the threats to Israel to be removed, and for the broader Middle East region to gain greater stability. That also being backed up by Vice President Harris as well, who said that President Biden and I do not want to see conflict in the Middle East escalate into a broader regional war. Diplomacy remains the best path forward to protect civilians and achieve lasting stability in the region. The US State Department also ordering non-essential workers at its embassy in Beirut to evacuate the country, to leave, and also along with the family members of those who are working in that mission as well. Biden also ordering the Department of the Defense to rethink the defensive force posture in the region to try to deter any more attacks happening from outside of Israel. And that is something that we are learning was at the behest of the Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant in a call to Lloyd Austin on Friday. He asked Lloyd Austin to consider changing operational stances and also to release statements to deter the Iranians from getting involved in this attack.
Now, the strike comes just, days after the US pushed for a ceasefire, Netanyahu seemingly defying Washington yet again. How's that being taken by the US?
Yeah, this has been a constant source of frustration for the Americans. There's many times that Netanyahu clearly says something to them in private, and then when things go public, he bolts and changes his mind. We're hearing from various sources that Joe Biden felt somewhat humiliated by the recent pushback that Netanyahu gave against the 21-day ceasefire plan that the US put forward with some of its allies just days ago. And in private, Joe Biden has long railed against Netanyahu for seemingly going against his word and going against what Joe Biden believes is in the best interest of the Israeli people, and seemingly putting Netanyahu's own political aims above the will of the people of Israel as well. There is also we're also learning from a source as well that since this happened on Friday, that Joe Biden has not spoken directly to Netanyahu himself. He has had contact through various members of the U.S. government, through Lloyd Austin and Secretary Blinken and so on, people like that. But directly, he's had no actual contact with Netanyahu since these events took place. And there is a sense here that the Biden administration does approve of the killing of Nasrallah, but that they are actually rating more against the fact that there was no warning given to the U.S. administration and no transparency given to the U.S. administration as well from the Israelis.
All right, thank you very much for that. Fraser Jackson in Washington. Well, let's get an international perspective now with Gilbert Achcar. He's a professor of international relations at SOAS University of London. Thank you so much for joining us here on France 24. There have been months of diplomatic efforts, including, many trips made by the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken to the Middle East, multiple efforts to negotiate ceasefire talks. But despite international efforts, the conflict just seems to be spiraling day by day. I mean, is there any possible way to find a diplomatic solution and de-escalate here?
Yes, but precisely, let me comment on what you just said. You are right that there has been all these efforts at finding some kind of diplomatic solution. And the last was this proposal of a 21-day ceasefire. So that shows you the fallacy of describing Hezbollah as a terrorist organization, because you don't deal with a terrorist organization in that way. You don't try to get diplomatic solutions with a terrorist organization, and you don't seek ceasefire with a terrorist organization, which is exactly what the U.S. administration has been doing for several months, actually. So, Hezbollah is an organization with several MPs. It's a mass organization, and to call that terrorist and to justify by this label this assassination and what has been going on for several days in Lebanon, including a lot of civilians being killed or maimed by that. That shows you that the United States is actually fully backing Israel in what it's doing and not trying to put any serious pressure on the Netanyahu government.
Now, it's an expansion of a wider conflict, a wider regional conflict that we've been fearing for months now. And there are so many parties involved, including Iranian proxies. I mean, break it down for us. How do you see this playing out in the region?
Yes, exactly. And the Netanyahu government is taking huge risks of igniting a regional conflagration. And that would involve the United States. And so the United States could be driven to such a regional conflagration by the will of the Netanyahu government. And, the assassination of Nasrallah, whatever view you have of Hezbollah, he definitely was, in relative terms to what the organization, a moderate leader, in the sense that ever since 2006, the war that happened in 2006, he hasn't tried to send his troops across the border and do, for instance, what happened on 7 October in Gaza. And in his latest, or one of his latest speeches, he emphasized the fact that they do not target civilians in Israel. They try to focus on military targets. So, his killing, the same goes for the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh, the former leader of Hamas, who was assassinated in Tehran. These are figures who are relatively moderate people, and the tendency would be to replace them with people who are quite more radical than them. So it's clear that the Israeli government is not seeking peace. It's trying to destroy by force and humiliate all its opponents in the region. It's not trying to find any kind, of compromise. And that is leading the whole region towards the abyss.
And you say Israel doesn't want peace, and I want to continue with that a little bit, because Israel's actions have been, increasingly bellicose, and we saw Netanyahu doubling down and defending those actions at the UN General Assembly. So the question has to be asked: does Netanyahu want diplomacy?
Yes, absolutely. You're absolutely right. This speech at the UN was extremely bellicose. It's the most it was insulting. He used insulting terms to not only against the usual opponents of the state of Israel, but against the whole assembly. And 3/4 of them had walked out. He just called the whole UN anti-Semitic. This kind of discourse that shows you the kind of political perspective that this person represents, and he definitely is not seeking peace except with part of the Arab world, but and even those, he is ignoring the fact that even the Saudi kingdom now is explaining that there can't be any kind of establishment of diplomatic relations without the emergence of a Palestinian state. He is trying to ignore all that. So what he is doing is not only not going to produce any further steps towards peace, but it's even going to dismantle whatever had been achieved until now.
So Israel, of course, has the backing of the US, but it's also increasingly stigmatized on the world stage. So do you think it can continue what it's doing, given this?
Well, as long as you have Joe Biden, who is the first American president, to my knowledge, to have declared himself in the past a Zionist, not only a pro-Israel, but a Zionist himself, as long as you have Joe Biden, who has been fully backing the whole war that started after the 7 October attack, who has provided Israel with everything it used in this war. Without the U.S. support, this war would not have been possible. It's actually the first joint U.S.-Israeli war. And yesterday, again, in the middle of what was going on in Lebanon, we heard that the Biden administration offered a close to $9 billion military aid package to Israel. So the United States, whatever the Biden administration is saying, is, sorry to say it, but is sheer hypocrisy. They are actually fully backing, enabling, empowering the Netanyahu government in what it is doing.
All right, Gilbert Achcar, Professor of International Relations at SOAS University of London, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us here on the program. We appreciate it very much. Now, Iran has announced that a prominent general in its paramilitary Revolutionary Guard was killed in the same airstrike. Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei has announced 5 days of national mourning. Meanwhile, the Iraqi government has also declared 3 days of mourning over the news. Well, Khamenei has called on the groups forming its so-called Axis of Resistance to step up their attacks on Israel. France 24's Shirley Sitbon has a look now at this network of Iranian proxies.
Iran sees the network of armed groups it has formed across the Middle East as the Axis of Resistance. This was the statement of Iran's supreme leader, read out on television after Hassan Nasrallah was killed.
The fate of this region will be decided by the resistance forces with Hezbollah at their head.
Iran's enemies see these proxies as a threatening alliance. Tehran's way of confronting them indirectly. Not just Israel and the United States, but also its rivals in the region. The most powerful group in the Axis remains Hezbollah. Its militants carried out terrorist attacks on U.S. and French forces in the past. In recent years, it has focused on fighting Israel and on backing President Bashar al-Assad, another Iran ally, during the war in Syria. In Gaza, the Axis comprises of Hamas and the Islamic Jihad. In Iraq, pro-Iranian Islamic resistance militias have joined the Axis. And in Yemen, the Houthi militia. Since October 7th, those groups have all tried to hit the Israeli territory. The Houthis also targeted cargo ships in the Red Sea, a key route for international commerce. Iraq's pro-Iran militants struck a U.S. military base early this year. Those are the groups Iran's leader has called to escalate their fighting with Israel. And although most of their attacks have been intercepted, Iran has provided them with a vast arsenal of missiles, which they haven't used to their full capacities.
Well, the European Commission and the EU Aviation Safety Agency has warned airlines to avoid Israeli and Lebanese airspace for a month. EU states are also urging their citizens in Lebanon to leave if they have not done so already. Our correspondent Dave Keating has the details from Brussels.
The announcement came earlier today from the European Commission and the European Aviation Safety Authority closing airspace, essentially telling European airlines that they shouldn't fly into Lebanese or Israeli airspace. That actually reportedly caused a couple flights to have to turn around mid-flight, which were flying to the area. And that recommendation for the flights not to enter that airspace will be in effect for the next month until October 31st. Now, there's been a lot of speculation as to why this happened today. There was a Reuters report that there earlier today was supposed to be a flight from Iran landing in Beirut, but that the Israeli authorities contacted Lebanese air control and said they could not allow that Iranian flight to land. And so the air traffic control told the Iranian flight they couldn't land. I think because of the implicit threat there that that commercial flight might have been shot down, that may have resulted in this announcement today telling European airlines not to enter that airspace, because after all, these aerial bombardments have been happening for several days. Nevertheless, this announcement, the 1 month time frame of this has really raised eyebrows, because it kind of sends the message that the EU has now baked into its planning a major escalation here that's going to last a long time. And this is while actually today we haven't had any official reaction to the killing of Hezbollah's leader from EU leaders. And so the question is, why are we getting this advice about the safety of Europeans and maybe not a political response? We know that individual European countries have been telling their citizens to leave as soon as possible immediately, really, while commercial flights were still running. Now, of course, commercial flights will not be running. And so the question is what measures individual European countries might be taking to get their citizens home. We know that Spain may be organizing something. The UK has sent some people to their bases in Cyprus, just across the sea. So we'll see, because for sure there are still some European citizens left in Lebanon. And now that the commercial flights have stopped, there may be some extra efforts by European countries to get their citizens out.
You're watching our special edition here on France 24. We'll continue to bring you more after a short break. Stay tuned.